My name's Samantha Yarwood. I joke that I'm a recovering marketer. I worked in marketing for 15 plus years in strategy and innovation and communications. My passion has always been innovation, though. So, really understanding the inner workings of a company, and rather than it being like entrepreneurship, it's entrepreneurship. But also, a big part of that is who you are as a human being, which is tied into leadership. And a few years ago, I decided to develop my leadership skills. And as I was on that journey, I realized that one of the biggest questions in leadership starts with actually who you are as a person, what your values are, what your strengths are, what you're passionate about, and also the impact that you want to have in the world. And that sent me on a journey to understand why more people don't explore that, but also how that can help to handle change and how that can help to create better organizations that have an impact in the world. So did a master's in change, and that brings me to where I am now, and I'm doing my doctorate, which will, of course, be focused on leadership and change. So this week was really centered around thinking about innovation, disruption, what outside disruption can create within an organization, so which is considered stress. But more or less, it really framed up the way to look at organizations through a different lens, whether that be through innovation or through technology. And this week, I would say, has given us a broad perspective from frameworks that we can use to look at and apply to innovation. I'd also say it's opened up some experiences and lenses around how we might be able to take the work that we're doing in our doctorate and apply it to actually our day-to-day practices as leaders or in our work environments. And also just having a chance to really see what that innovation and entrepreneurship lens looks like actually in practice. And by doing some site visits, seeing how innovation is managed from large corporations like an IBM as an example, to looking at startups in the Station F space and just the really kind of amazing ecosystem that's being created there. They were fantastic and brought in two really, I'm going to say, different perspectives and approaches. In fact, we only found out at the close of the program that they hadn't worked together before, which I never would have known. I'd say the way that the thinking that they brought in is Kieran has done a lot of work in innovation, really looking at ecosystems having massive impact in the world, and also he brings in a really unusual lens at the way that he looks at things and is constantly bringing innovation to his practice and thinking about how he can apply things in a different manner. I'd say there was two really big takeaways that I walked away from him. One was, how can you actually look at organizations like DNA and really get into the what creates an organization, which was phenomenal. And the way that he approaches it into thinking kind of blew my mind. But also I'm using biomimicry to understand organizations and biology, and applying biology to the thinking. And then the other practice that he brought in was some examples of the work that he's done in innovation and on the first date, which really framed kind of the stage around what does innovation mean. And then I'd say where it was a really nice compliment is the other professor that we had, Bryce. He was really looking at it through explaining his papers to us and bringing to life his papers. So it wasn't just talking about innovation, strategy, and management, but also in giving us the overarching frameworks, which I think some professors tend to do. It was really getting to the details around why did they approach the research in the way that they did? How did they structure the research? So what I found from both of the professors was we walked away from this experience with two different points of view, two different approaches, but also an understanding of how we can bring research to life, but also use our research to have impact in the world. I actually had a moment earlier today where I just realized that being able to step out of my everyday work and everyday life just expands all of these other ideas and opportunities. So it's not necessarily with the module in particular, but it was some of the thinking that was brought in, some of the thinking around gamification, some of the thinking around using technology, not as technology as being a disruptor, but as a tool to bring about innovation, to support people, to support processes, to think in a different way. The other piece too was, which isn't necessarily tied into the innovation piece, but we did talk a lot about culture, which also led to some discussions around like people and leadership. And my thesis and a few others is on leadership. And also being together, we realized how many commonalities there actually are in our program and learning from each other. That was a really big takeaway, especially with the dynamics of the fact that we're such a global cohort. There's so many different nationalities represented. And I would say another takeaway would be just looking at the way, even though there's systems and structures and frameworks that we all use, they might be used in slightly different ways. So being able to learn that from each other. But when I think about innovation in particular, I think probably my biggest takeaway from this is how do I bring more innovation and more differentiated perspectives into my thinking. Yeah. Yeah, I think it was interesting. We had a chance to visit IBM and to see their innovation center, as well as how they're using data specifically within retail, manufacturing, consumer packaged goods, energy, and a few other industries. I think the takeaway from that was it was a nice example of looking at how theoretical is put into practical, specifically from how do you approach innovation, what are the tools that you can use, how are you thinking about sustainability and the impact on the world, so the SDGs, as well as when you want to be creative, what are those tools that you can use from a design thinking process, or even we did go to their studio as well, so we had a chance to see how they're bringing some of those ideas and practices to life. So that was a great experience. And then today we went to Station F, which honestly is just absolutely phenomenal. And what I really enjoyed about the Station F visit was, first of all, I've wanted to go there for years. So having the chance to actually physically be there and see the space, it's incredible the ecosystem that they're building, because it's bringing together everything within the startup ecosystem, from the entrepreneurs themselves to the venture capitalists who are investing, to the support tools that they need, like AWS or government support, or you name it, but having them on site, as well as incubators, so different incubator programs to be able to give the startups the tools that they need, but really creating an environment where people can learn from each other and really propel their businesses. So it was really cool to see that firsthand. But what I liked about it was we started off with a very global view around what does the ecosystem look like? And then we had a chance to go into more of, I'm going to say, a macro level, which was around, what was the whole story and evolution of Station F. And then we went in, and that was talking about, what does the French startup look like? Were investments being made? What does that compare to in terms of other global engines like Stockholm, London, San Francisco, obviously, Berlin, China, but just the role that Europe is starting to play and how it's changed the dynamics over time. And then going into more of a micro level where we actually had a chance to hear some pitches from some entrepreneurs. So we literally got to see kind of the whole ecosystem at work. Yeah, really enjoyed that. I think the reality is that we're all on a doctorate journey together. So there's an immediate connection there because we have a shared experience. For my cohort, we started off where we were virtual. We were all in times of COVID. I think what's really interesting about the group is just the difference of experiences. Like there's people in our cohort from, people who work in like the Air Force or military, to people who work in manufacturing, and manufacturing being very broad, to people who are working in, finance, venture capitalism, others that are working in leadership or product development. I mean, it's not even just about the backgrounds and experiences, but it's also the diversity of the cultures. I mean, what did we figure out the other day? Like with the people who are here, including cohort 1, there was 13 different countries that were represented. So, just the diversity of that is amazing. But I think there is this connection because we are working on a long-term project. We are working on our doctorate. But it's so much more. There's shared commonality. What I thought was really fascinating is somebody in my class who's potentially more observant than I realized had a really beautiful insight about how much everybody in our cohort actually cares about the world and cares about impact. So yes, we might all be professionals, but we actually all really care about people and the world. And that's, I think, another bonding agent, but just overall, really great people. Yeah.